Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. I'm your host, Paul Metza. Our guest tonight, Andrea Swenson, is an author, a radio host, and music journalist. She hosts the local show at Minnesota's Public Radio's 89.3 The Current. Before joining NPR, she was the music editor at City Pages. She has written a wonderful new book called Got to Be Something Here, The Rise of the Minneapolis Sound. We're really delighted to have her here for the whole show tonight. Welcome, Andrea.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. I am really enjoying your book.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear it.
When did you've been writing about music for a long time and listening to music, I'm sure, longer. You're a native of Moose Lake, Minnesota,
yes,
which I pass every time I'm going up to the Iron Range for the holidays. When did you tell yourself, I think there's an idea for a book here?
I think the seed was planted in 2012. You probably recall the Secret Stash Twin Cities Funk and Soul compilation coming out. And that was just a revelation, I think, for a lot of people, that there was so much music and so much history in this scene that wasn't documented.
And that those tapes still existed.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that the musicians are still around playing, and they are talking to each other, and all these memories are just kind of floating in the air. And so I went to a rehearsal for the big launch party for that compilation, and I met a lot of the musicians for the first time, like Willie Walker.
Right, my good buddy.
Yes, and the Valdons. And
I remember you called me. Now, Willie and I have been playing together. Willie Walker, as he used to be known, is now known again for, I think we're going on 7 years. And I remember you called me about that time and said, you got Willie's number? And you tell me what you were working on. And so I'm glad I was able to hook you up.
Thank you. Yeah. I appreciate that. He was amazing. Yeah. The first chapter actually starts with him.
Right.
He has so many really vivid memories of those very early days. You know, he started playing in the Twin Cities in 1960.
Right.
Singing with fellow teenagers in the North Minneapolis neighborhood. So there were all these stories just kind of percolating, and I just knew that someone needed to turn on a tape recorder and write these down. And I didn't know that would be me for maybe 2 years after that. But in 2014, I started working on it in earnest, and I'm really glad that I did.
Well, that's a great, you've got a great radar as a journalist to feel that. It's been so interesting. We recently had Terry Katzman on, an old friend of mine who talked about the Savage Young Do, the Husker Du compilation. And then before that, Chris Riemenschneider. And, and you look at the books that have been written just in the last handful of years about the Twin Cities music scene. And what a treasure trove of experiences that people have been able to capture and share.
Right. Yeah, and I think all credit goes to the two kind of regional publishers that we have in town, the University of Minnesota Press, where I published my book, and the Minnesota Historical Society Press. They really turned an interest area. They found that this is like a very fertile ground for storytelling.
Right.
And I'm just really grateful that they're supporting people doing that.
And that their readers are kind of in that demographic that knows about the history as well and lives some of the history.
Right.
But yes, I think that's a good point. My book, Blue Guitar Highway, was put out by the University of Minnesota Press in 2011, and your book, Got to Be Something Here, when was it actually, the release date?
October 10th of this year.
Oh.
Yeah, it's very new.
So you've been busy.
Oh, yes. Yeah, we had a big launch party at the Fitzgerald Theater.
Right.
Willie played.
Mm-hmm. And the Valdons.
And the Valdons, and Wanda Davis, and Andre Simone, and it was just incredible. I don't think I've ever had an experience like that before. It was so profound to see everyone coming together, not just from, one particular scene, but across generations.
Right.
And realizing that this story, started in the 60s, but is still going on today.
Right.
And we had Nookie Jones as the house band, and Paviel singing, who's just contemporary, amazing singer. And to see these basically three generations coming together and saying,
Fantastic.
This is a really incredible community that we built. It was really profound.
Were you able to audio and videotape that show? Because, boy, do I see a KTCA Channel 2 documentary around the corner.
That would be really cool.
Yeah. We'll just walk down the hall, right?
Yeah.
Or across the street. Andrea, Swenson, you grew up in Moose Lake, Minnesota. I've been through that town. My mother actually used to work when she started as a nurse at the hospital there.
Oh, sure.
So we were very familiar with Moose Lake. But when did you really start to listen to music? And
oh gosh,
what turned you on to your love of music? It continues to this day, I might add.
My parents.
Okay.
I mean, it was a very young age. It was a very musical house. My mom played piano. My dad played guitar. They had amazing record collections, and that was kind of what we did as a family was, listen to music together, dance together.
Oh, how much fun.
It was just, I'm an only child, so it was just the three of us, and that just started so early. I remember my dad even teaching me lessons through music. Like if I threw a fit, he would sit down and play me the Rolling Stones. You can't always get what you want.
Oh, nice. Good work, Dad.
So it was just kind of woven into my life very early on. And then I took an interest in music from an early age. I started playing piano and flute and was in the band at Moose Lake. And then when we moved down to the Twin Cities when I was about 12, then all of a sudden I had access to this whole big world.
Right.
I had MTV for the first time, and I could go to the record stores in Minneapolis, go to the Electric Fetus and things like that. So it's just kind of been part of my DNA, basically.
Well, I was just, the book really kind of wraps up with Prince and how he came of age in that time. And, when you mention the Electric Fetus, in one of the greatest independent record stores anywhere, right? And one of the few places that independent musicians like myself can consign their records.
Right.
So that's a beautiful outlet as well that they provide to the community. But I just hearken back to that beautiful picture of Prince going through, the record collection and the magazines just a few weeks before he died at the Electric Fetus.
Right. I actually was in there just last week, and the manager, Bob, told me that fans are coming in from all over the world and standing where he stood in that picture
to get
their own picture taken so they know that they stood right where Prince was.
Cool. And then there's, in the background up on the wall, is the poster of Tom Waits.
Yeah.
I talked to the longtime clerk that sold him his batch of records, and he told me about 4 or 5 records that day. I believe Joni Mitchell, Swan Silvertones, and I believe Sly and the Family Stone. Oh, Steely Dan.
Wow.
And something else. Yeah.
Interesting.
So, and the other thing, well, there's a lot of things I love about your book, Andrea. Got to be something here, but the pictures are phenomenal.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Tell us, how many photos do you think are in the book?
I believe there's over 80.
Wow.
Yeah, and we were really intentional about how the pictures were used and what pictures were chosen. I really didn't want it to feel like you were only going to look at the pictures and skip over the stories.
Right.
So we made them black and white and kind of in the text, and I kind of pictured it like a textbook.
Yeah.
They're just kind of helping to illustrate the stories. But then we found them from so many different sources. I did a lot of research at the Historical Society, at the downtown Minneapolis Central Library. They have a special collection.
Talk about that, because I was on the 4th floor, correct?
Yep.
And I was there. I forget exactly what I was looking for, but that's where I saw they had the picture that you have in there of the Prince Rogers Nelson trio.
Yes.
Which is a funny picture because it's actually a quartet.
Right.
But what was interesting about that I actually saw at least one of the prints of that at the Hennepin County Library, and I'm a big library guy. In fact, go down to that library.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And the people that work there are phenomenal.
Yes.
Plus Ernie Batson, he retired from there. David Stenshall, the musician from Boyle the Land, he works there. So, but that 4th floor is amazing. So tell us, some of the other places you got the photos from.
A lot of them, honestly, came from people's personal collections. There's a band called The Family that I go pretty in-depth in. In one of the chapters, they were basically the big brothers of Prince and Andre Simone and Morris Day in North Minneapolis.
Well, in that picture that I was just talking about, the Prince Rogers Nelson trio, Andre Simone's dad is playing bass.
Yeah.
So tell us about that when that story.
Yeah, that was such a cool moment. So I interviewed Andre a couple times, actually, for this book, and he was remembering back to this very specific moment where he met Prince on the first day of 7th grade at Lincoln Junior High in near North Minneapolis, and they immediately had this connection of, oh, we both are music people, we need to jam. So Prince invited Andre to his dad's apartment where there were all kinds of instruments for them to play with, and Andre was looking at the piano, and there's this little photograph of Prince's dad and his band, and he said, gosh, that guy looks like my dad. And Prince's dad came home after work that day and looked at Andre and looked at the picture and looked at Andre again and was like, I know you.
Wow, how phenomenal
there
is
were
that?
So many stories like that. That neighborhood was so tight-knit and that community was so small that it was basically like a big family, that everyone kind of knew each other and looked out for each other. So I love that story.
You know, playing with Willie Walker is an honor, but hanging out with him is so much fun.
Yeah.
So we've really got to know each other, driving to gigs together, hanging out on the gig on the breaks. And so I've heard stories about the Cozy Bar and all the King Solomon Mines. And what's the one I can't pronounce? Nick, the one that's
the Nakarima.
That's America spelled backwards, right? So I've heard about these places through Willie, and then actually see the pictures was really great.
Right, yeah, and some of those came from the Historical Society. Has a huge archive of photos by Charles Chambliss, and that was a treasure trove. They actually just put out another book from the Historical Society Press just of his pictures. He did not just music, but kind of daily life in North Minneapolis, and really documented the 1970s African-American community.
Thanks for listening to the Wall and Power Radio Hour. We are going to have author and radio host and writer Andrea Swenson on for the whole show tonight, talking about her great new book, Got to Be Something Here, The Rise of the Minneapolis Sound. Stay tuned.
The number one source of the Twin Cities gay scene is all digital. Follow Twin Cities Gay Scene on Facebook and Twitter. Sign up for the Scene Shot email blast for weekly updates and chances to win great prizes. No app is needed to view the bi-weekly web editions of Scene. It's GLBTQ media for the mobile generation. Find it all at TwinCitiesGayScene.com. That's TwinCitiesGayScene.com.
This is Dan Brooks, Senior Vice President and Financial Advisor with RBC Wealth Management. For the past 19 years, I've been managing wealth for individuals, institutions, and corporate retirement plan sponsors. Throughout my career, I've seen common traits in successful investors. They include the courage to be diversified, the willingness to work with a professional, the discipline to follow a plan, and patience. I welcome the opportunity to help contribute to your financial success. Call me at 612-371-2396.
Saturdays at 1 p.m., you have a chance at a fresh start, a new beginning. Hi, everybody. This is Freddie Bell, host of New Beginnings. Our show features the concerns of America's 78 million baby boomers in employment, finance, health and nutrition, spirituality, and even entertainment. Every day is a chance for a fresh start. Join us Saturdays at 1 p.m. for New Beginnings with Freddie Bell on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota.
Do yourself a favor and check out the amazing cuisine of EatLocalMinnesota.com. More than just a website, EatLocalMinnesota.com provides you with the best local and independently owned restaurants in the Twin Cities. Serving family favorites in Minneapolis since 1964, Milda's Cafe is a great spot for breakfast or lunch. Wake up with their delicious Eggs Benedict or biscuits and gravy and savor their many great lunch options. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, Milda serves authentic Finnish pasties. Open weekdays 6 to 3 and now on weekends 8 to 2 on Glenwood Avenue, 4 blocks east of Penn. Specializing in Szechuan and Peking cuisine, the Great Wall Chinese restaurant has been a local favorite since 1981. They offer one of the most extensive menus in the Twin Cities. Favorites include the sesame chicken, imperial beef, and Peking duck. The Great Wall restaurant is located off 45th and France with takeout available too. More at greatwallrestaurant.us.
Hi, friends. I've been talking to you about Minnesota's first green cemetery, Prairie Oaks Memorial Eco Gardens. It's an entirely new way of looking at our last earthly step. Burials are designed to have as little impact on the environment as possible. For many of us, a continuation of the commitment we made during our lifetimes. Let me suggest you go to the website, mngreengraves.com. Explore what it is. Prairie Oaks Memorial Eco Gardens. It's a lovely place, a peaceful place. Minnesota's first green cemetery.
Welcome back to the Wall and Power Radio Hour. I'm your host, Paul Metza. I hope you've been enjoying this show. We've got Miss Andrea Swenson on for the whole night tonight, talking about not only her love of music and her history of how she came to love music, but her new book, Got to Be Something Here, about the history of the Minneapolis Sound. Andrea, where did the title come from?
A song.
Is it?
Yes. So there's so many great songs that I discovered through the research process. One of them, it's billed as the Lewis Connection, but the people that actually recorded on it were this band, The Family, that got started in North Minneapolis in the early 70s at the Way Community Center.
Right.
And
Spike Moss, right?
Yes. Spike Moss was their manager.
Right. I saw it, because anybody who's been involved with Minneapolis politics for the last 35, 40 years, you bumped into Spike at some point.
Yeah.
But it was so great to see that picture of a young Spike.
Yes.
Yeah. Handsome guy.
Yeah, he was very involved in the Way. The Way was built basically in the immediate aftermath of the first unrest that happened in North Minneapolis in 1966.
Right.
And by the early 70s, it was the place to hang out for all of these young kids coming up in the neighborhood. So there was a music room where you could go and jam and play all these different instruments, and this band formed called The Family. And their history is just fascinating because they ended up mentoring this whole generation of young kids that we associate now with the Minneapolis Sound, like Prince and Morris and Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. The Family was led by Sonny Thompson, who went on to play in the NPG with Prince and Sonny T. And a lot of other really talented musicians in this group. So they wrote and recorded this song called Got to Be Something Here. And the lyrics and the sound of it and then this backstory, they all just really spoke to me. They actually hired Prince to play guitar on the recording, so very quietly you can hear him a little bit in the background.
Right, and so how old would have Prince been, 15 at the time?
He would have been 17, I think. He was about to go to New York and try to shop his demos around to Warner Brothers. And he actually used the money from that recording session to buy the plane ticket.
How cool.
So just a fascinating story. And then, the idea of there's got to be something here for us, which is what the lyric is, it really speaks to, I think, the theme of the book, which is that this African-American music community was basically being ignored by everyone outside of their immediate neighborhood. And they still managed to persevere and to book gigs and make records and form this scene that eventually became world famous.
Right.
But they had to overcome a lot to do that.
Well, you, in the beginning of the book, you talked about the Rondo neighborhood, which would be kind of between, let's say, Dale and Lexington on either side of 94, very thriving black neighborhood. And so you get into a lot of the politics and the segregation back there. But there's a great quote in there. Believe it is every freeway is a political act.
Yes. Yeah, that really spoke to me after researching. You realize that we kind of take these roads for granted. We use them to just whip back and forth between the two cities, but to plan out where those roads go and why, it's basically following a path of least resistance. And this is true of pretty much every major metropolitan area, that it's the poor areas, it's the areas where minorities live that ended up getting bulldozed to make way for these roads. And that was certainly true of Rondo. The people that lived there didn't even know that these discussions were happening about building 94. There were two proposed routes, one which would have run along, they called it the St. Anthony route, which goes basically behind, I think it's called Territorial Road, along where the train tracks run. And that was ignored as a potential because it was so much cheaper and faster to just go right through the heart of this neighborhood.
And they sure as hell weren't going to build a highway down Summit or Grand.
Well, yeah. But the culture that existed there and the neighborhood and the people, it was such a small area, and it was where so many of the African Americans who moved here in the 40s and 50s ended up going to live. And to just wipe out that neighborhood and take out the core, I think 80% of the residents had to be displaced. That just absolutely obliterated the sense of culture, this kind of core, the sense of community. It took out music venues. It just made it really difficult to still feel that kind of vibrant sense of like we're together doing something right now.
Right.
So it just had a massive impact on music and in addition to just daily life. So I really wanted to get into that because I think it's just yet another example of, all these barriers that were put up in front of people that were just trying to live and trying to make art. And I just feel like people my age need to know about this.
It's interesting when you think about the Rondo neighborhood that the one real solid rock in that neighborhood that didn't exist at the time, but now is the Penumbra Theater.
Yes.
And so, which I was privileged to not know, but watch a little bit of August Wilson in action. Wow. We used to play at the 400 Bar, my band Catching the Stars, in the early 80s. And there was this man, he would smoke Camel Straights, he'd have sweaters, occasionally tweed jackets, tie was always undone, and he was always writing in a little notebook. Of course, we were right down the street from Jack Ruler's theater, Mixed Blood. And so I came to find out several years later that was August Wilson.
Wow. And
he loved to write in smoky, busy, loud bars. And so I saw almost every time Lou Bellamy and company would debut an August Wilson show, I'd go to the Penumbra, and I knew I was just sitting in the midst of magic and history.
Yeah.
And so, and of course, so many of August's plays are about his growing up in Cleveland. And so there was that at least psychic connection between Rondo and what I used to witness at the Penumbra.
Oh.
And their Black Nativity is a wonderful performance that everyone should go see for the holidays. And also we had Gary Hines on last week. We're going to air that show next week. But we have the night before Christmas with the Sounds of Blackness, December 23rd at the Fitzgerald.
Legendary.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about, we're going to jump around. That's what we do here in Wallen Power TV. So where have you been going for your readings, and what sort of response have you been getting?
Well, the biggest launch was at the Fitzgerald Theater. Like I mentioned, we had live performances, but I also told some of the stories from the book. I talked about Rondo, I talked about North Minneapolis and the construction of the Way. And it was interesting to take that kind of presentation to a place like the Fitzgerald Theater, which is, most known for Prairie Home Companion, and to really try to tell this other kind of story about Minnesota music history. And at times it was not pretty, You're getting into some pretty hard truths. And that was just such a profound experience for me to be able to tell these stories, but then to have the evening be so full of joy and such a celebration of these artists. So that is just going to stand out for me forever as a highlight. But I've also done things at the Electric Fetus and the Bryant Lake Bowl. I'm going to be popping into many of the bookstores here in town, like Moon Palace. I did something at Majors and Quinn, of course.
My favorite bookstore in the world, Majors and Quinn.
Me too. And the Harmar Barnes & Noble.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
Yes.
Harmar Superstar.
Yes.
Yeah, I bumped into Harmar. I just saw one of his, first time I'd ever seen him, and we hang out at a place occasionally called Grumpy's Bar in Northeast, and I was telling Harmar, I said that was that was like the last place you'd go and find Radio Shack.
Yeah.
And they had a beautiful theater there, too. I don't even know. I haven't been there in a while. We've got Andrea Swenson on. She has her own show called The Local Show on 89.3 The Current. NPR, what day of the week and what time is it?
Sunday nights at 6 o'clock.
The Wallen Power Radio Hour will be back after these messages.
Where there is power, there is resistance. Where there is love, there is life. Resist with love this holiday season with products from Northern Sun. Since 1979, Northern Sun has been spreading the love and supplying resistance with shirts, stickers, signs, and buttons. Embrace the future and confront the crazies in Washington, too. Find the love and the resistance at Northern Sun in Minneapolis on East Lake Street or online at northernsun.com.
You're listening to AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, the most informative source for progressive politics and news in the Twin Cities. Get involved online at am950radio.com, where you can sign up for our weekly newsletter, check out the local businesses that help make this content available, and stay up to date on the latest news and upcoming events. You can always reach us by email at comment@am950radio.com. That's comment@am950radio.com. Thanks for listening.
While shopping for a fireplace insert at Woodland Stoves and Fireplaces, I was amazed at all the choices. Not just gas, electric, or wood burning, but also built-in or freestanding, and options in every style from antique to modern. The staff really listened to us, explained the options, and helped us choose a fireplace we absolutely love. Now it warms our hearts and our home every winter. Thank you, Woodland Stoves, for a great addition.
Hi, I'm Peter Solak, putting in a word for the EPA Burn Wise campaign. It has important information about clean burning fireplaces. This is an important part of our mission at Woodland Stoves and Fireplaces. We know that the fireplace has to work. Work with your life, work with your living space, and also be environmentally smart. Come see us. Learn to burn wise. We have over 35 working units on display at the corner of Riverside and East Franklin Avenue in Minneapolis. Visit our store in person or online at woodlandstoves.com.
Woodland Stoves and Fireplaces, out of the ordinary products and services since 1977.
Enjoy a delicious home-cooked breakfast or lunch away from the kitchen at Milda's Cafe, now open 7 days a week. Milda's Cafe has been cooking up family favorites since 1964. Grab a coffee and sit down for a delicious Philly scramble, house-made rolls, or Denver omelet. Stop in for lunch where you'll find authentic Finnish pasties every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Open weekdays 6 to 3, weekends 8 to 2. Milda's Cafe on Glenwood Avenue, 4 blocks east of Penn.
Seasteads, the family-owned flooring business that's been serving the Twin Cities for 100 years, has plenty of carpet and sheet vinyl stock to choose from and can help you with your wood and laminate needs too. Seasteads will come to your home, provide a free estimate, and professionally install their quality brand-name flooring products. For your next flooring project, call the trusted, experienced experts at Seasteads 651-224-5474, located across from the new Saints Stadium and online at seasteadscarpet.com.
It's the best time of the year. Toyotathon is on. Rudy Luther Toyota is celebrating their 40th anniversary with great deals all month long on all new Toyotas. With huge incentives from Toyota, now is the time to buy. Great rebates on RAV4s, great rebates on Camrys, and remember, you get my favorite perk from Rudy Luther, the Luther Advantage Card, which gets you 10 cents off per gallon at holiday station stores for 3 years with every vehicle purchase. Toyotathon is on. Stop in today on the southeast corner of 394 and 169 in Golden Valley.
Welcome back to the Wall and Power Radio Hour. This is your host, Paul Metza. Our conversation continues with author Andrea Swenson and her great new book, Got to Be Something Here. I loved reading about this, the young Jewish guy with the recording studio in his basement of his parents' house.
Yes.
Tell us about this guy and tell us how he got into recording, because the whole thing is really kind of an interesting story about emerging technology.
Oh, absolutely. So in the 1950s, North Minneapolis was predominantly a Jewish neighborhood, and it was also where an increasing number of African Americans were migrating to. So there were these two kind of cultures coming together. And David Hursk was an enterprising young man from North High School, and he actually... He was going to his Hebrew lessons to prepare for his bar mitzvah when he was 12 or 13. And he noticed that his teacher, in order to teach him the proper dialect, was recording his voice onto a record, which is crazy to me. I really want one of these.
Right, no doubt.
But at the time, you could buy blank records and then a record player that had a little knife on it that would cut and actually record raw audio onto a 45 for you. So a little light went off, and he said, "Okay, I need to learn how to use that." He asked for that for his bar mitzvah present, and he started recording.
Sounds like the kind of kid that wasn't didn't subscribe to Mad Magazine and read comic books, but like he would go to the library and read Popular Mechanics.
Right.
12 years old with big glasses, right?
Yep, exactly. So he started buying these blank 45s, and he realized that it was cheaper to record a song off the radio onto a blank 45 than to buy the new one. And he started calling into WDGY and requesting songs. And then at one point, I think the announcer even said, "This is for young David. Are you ready?"
Wow.
And then did a little pause so he could put his little needle down. And then he would cut these 45s. And then he started selling them.
Wow.
Because, he just
That's
was
the
very
good part of
enterprising.
Minneapolis, right? Not the segregated part, but the cool side.
Yeah. So this all snowballed until he figured out around the age of 15 or 16 that he could actually record bands and make original 45s for these bands.
So and what year was this, Andrea?
He started recording in, I think, 1956.
Wow.
And they ended up being the first recordings of any rock and roll music, any R&B music. He actually cut the first R&B record to ever come out of the state of Minnesota in 1958. The band
That's
is called...
incredible.
I know, it's crazy. The band was called the Big M's. And there were a couple bands of similar kind of music. It was basically doo-wop at this point, kind of pre-R&B even. There was a band called the Velquins, and there was a band called the Wisdoms. And I was able to interview David. Unfortunately, he just passed away last year, but I interviewed him right before he passed away, and he was telling me these amazing stories.
And, of course, you have all your interviews on tape,
Yes.
right?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so they're going to find a happy home soon.
Yes. Yeah, and I made sure to record, with a really good microphone to get this history down. But, yeah, he was telling me that he was so impressed by these young bands that he wished that he had connections to Motown or to somebody at a big record label that could have distributed them outside of the state. Instead, they would cut 500 copies. Some of those ended up just being lost. The acetates of all these recordings ended up getting pitched because he left them in his parents' basement, and when he got married, they threw away all of his stuff. So unfortunately, it's just limited to the few these R&B 45s. There's just a few copies of them floating out, and I was able to find one.
Wow.
So that was a really big win on eBay.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, but I guess there is another copy in the metro area, too. So it's fascinating to me how, that was such an active scene, and the only thing that we know about it is what was captured.
Well, what was interesting, Andrea, when I was reading the story about David, enterprising young man, you think about late 50s, early 60s, whenever it was recorded, it wasn't cheap.
No.
Tell us about that, because you had to come up with some scratch to get this stuff recorded.
Yeah, he charged $1,000 for the recording time and for the records. And I asked him, how did a teenager in 1958 come up with that kind of money?
That'd be like $50,000 today.
He said their parents paid.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, he's just like, whatever,
Wow.
But it was worth it to them,
absolutely.
to be able, that was such a legitimizing step to be able to take as a young performer. Like, I have a record. That's so cool.
So back then, were they able to get airplay anywhere with those records?
No, not in the late 50s. There was some interest in TV, interestingly enough. There was a show on KSTP called, I think it was called Take 5. And they had local bands come on, and teenagers would come on the set and dance. But it really was a kind of upsetting story to hear recounted, because when these young doo-wop bands came on, the producers didn't want them dancing with any of the young white women.
Right.
And they actually filmed them from the waist down, so you could only see them playing their guitars and seeing people's feet shuffling around, but they didn't want
the complete opposite of Elvis.
Right, exactly. But they didn't want to show the black performers on TV, so really upsetting.
Yeah.
But in the 60s, there was more interest in radio, in the community radio. There was a station called KUXL that was active in North Minneapolis.
And that was just for the neighborhood?
It was, yeah. The studio was just over the border into Golden Valley, and then I think it was like a half-mile or a mile radius.
Which is, as John Steinbeck said in Travels with Charlie, when he passed through, is neither golden nor a valley.
That's true.
It's in his book.
Yeah. I think it was actually in an old hotel they would broadcast out of. And, yeah, just reached right into Near North and kind of the other way, a little bit into Golden Valley. But you had to live there to hear it, so they
Right.
physically couldn't reach outside of their neighborhood.
Kind of the predecessor to KMOJ.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Yep. And there was a nice handoff. And KMOJ, because it was an FM station, was able to broadcast more. KOXL was AM, and it only broadcast during the day.
Mm-hmm.
So when the sun went down, it would go off air.
Right.
So KMOJ was a nice step up.
We were talking a little earlier in the show about how the Rondo neighborhood in St. Paul was basically decimated by 94. But then so was part of Plymouth Avenue in North Minneapolis.
Absolutely. Yeah, and again, that was a cultural hub dating back to Prohibition era.
Mm-hmm.
There were jazz clubs along Olson Memorial Highway. That was a really, really active music spot. The Cozy Bar later on became very popular. The Blue Note, which was a jazz club.
Well, then you have one of the greatest jazz bassists of all time, Oscar Peterson.
Yes.
Was from Minneapolis.
Yep.
Lester Young,
Yes.
the saxophone player, used to live just right outside of Minneapolis. But you had kind of, I know a little bit about that history, and that's why your book kind of starts in 1958.
Mm-hmm.
But in the 30s and 40s and early 50s, the Flame was a jazz club for a while on
Right.
15th and Nicollet.
Right.
And you had all these after-hour jams going on where Duke Ellington would show
Mm-hmm.
up, or Fats Waller would show up at these places in North Minneapolis, these after-hour jam places.
Right.
In fact, I have a theory. Fats Waller, I believe he died at 38, and he was a man of large appetites, but a wonderful piano player, singer, and composer, very colorful character. Don't quote me exactly on it, but I believe he passed away in February. The story was, at least from my reading, I think the Paul Metza theory of Fats Waller's death was he was playing, he had a gig at the Flame for a week or two, and then he'd go to these after-hour jam sessions. And I swear to God, my feeling is he might have got pneumonia.
Oh, wow.
Because he was in late January, February, right before he passed away.
Sure.
He was, playing in Minneapolis.
Wow.
Cold weather. Anyway, we'll see. That's my theory. So, but let's talk about, as I said earlier, one of the things I loved about your book, Andrea, is these great pictures. So tell us about the clubs on the north side. There was the Cozy,
Yes.
right?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Willie Walkies play there all the time.
Oh, yeah. That ended up transitioning to another club called the Riverview. That was really popular.
That was a great place. That was right on the river.
Yeah. I think it was near where they're proposing to build a giant amphitheater now, which is kind of interesting.
Which would be cool.
Yeah, it would be cool.
Yeah, I mean, they had several shows there. I think Morris Wilson, who is in your book, great guy, did some shows there. Also, the Radiators from New Orleans used to have their annual show at the Riverview.
Okay,
yeah, gorgeous
cool.
spot.
The Blue Note that I mentioned, that was a really great place for different generations of people to come together. They had this Monday night jam where basically anyone could sit in. There's a picture of it where people, you can see just waiting in the wings with their horns, like, is it my turn yet? And a lot of the younger musicians that were coming up in the 60s talked about that being just like a really pivotal place for them where they felt like they could get on stage and experiment for the first time. And then another venue that I was really, really interested in that was actually in downtown that we mentioned earlier was King Solomon's Mine.
Right.
And I feel like that whole scene that was percolating on Olson Memorial at the Cozy kind of migrated downtown for this brief period in the late 60s, and that was really cool.
In the Fauché Tower.
Yes.
And I think we were talking before we started taping that where the Keys Cafe is, that was actually the space.
Yeah.
But it was one of the first places to, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a picture in your book of one of the integrated bands.
Yep. Yeah, it was really groundbreaking, honestly. The person that ran the club was named Dean Constantine.
Who just recently passed away.
Yes. Yeah, and he was a dance instructor, and he just loved dancing. So he didn't really think about necessarily the racial dynamic. He was more interested in just having really good music to move to. So he loved R&B, and he started booking these bands like the Amazers, who came out of the Rondo neighborhood, and Maurice McKinney's and the Blazers, who came out of North Minneapolis. And they ended up being the first black bands, or majority black bands, to play in downtown Minneapolis, which was previously off limits to groups that you could maybe get away with having like one black member, but if it was more than that, they really had trouble getting gigs. So he ended up being a bit of a civil rights pioneer, kind of not knowing it.
His soul.
And then it didn't really click in for him until the city started targeting his club and trying to shut it down, what was going on. And then he became really outspoken about the issue and talked to the Star Tribune and talked to all these papers, and I was able to find a lot of material talking about just the struggle he faced.
Well, there's a great picture of they sit around probably mimeographed call to arms for people that could sign and protest and send it to City Hall.
Yes.
And I think Willie Walker signed it.
Yep.
One of the Minnesota Vikings.
Yep.
Will Jones, a guy I never met, but he was really kind of the forerunner in a way to people like you and Marty Keller.
Oh, yeah.
That write about entertainment, nightlife in the Twin Cities. Just one of the many things for any of you out there in the viewing audience that will really enjoy in Andrea Swenson's book. Got to be something here. We're going to take a little break and come back with Andrea. I've got many more questions about the whole thing. You're wonderfully inquisitive and super smart, and I'm so glad you did your detective work on this. It's a very important piece of work.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Hope you're enjoying this conversation with Andrea Swenson on the Wall of Power Radio Hour. This is your host, Paul Metza, inviting you back for one more segment after these messages.
This holiday season, think outside the everyday chocolate box. Make a splash with your friends, family, and clients with elegantly packaged artisan chocolates from Chocolat Celeste. Come taste the intoxicating flavor of the finest European chocolate, handcrafted with love by founder and chocolatier Mary Leonard. Mary and her staff will help you understand the kind of chocolate that everyone wants and dreams about. Watch while the recipient opens the box. It's like a beautiful piece of holiday artwork. Then watch them taste the sweet and complex flavors. Frangelico, gingerbread, and Thai spice. Make your way to Chocolat Celeste. Open weekdays 10 to 5:30 and Saturday 10 to 5 p.m. Can't make it to Chocolat Celeste? Browse our website, chocolatceleste.com. View the holiday and corporate gift guides. Need help? Call Mary at 651-644-3823. Chocolat Celeste, the way chocolate is meant to be.
Join us each Monday morning at 7 a.m. for Social Entrepreneur, where things don't always go as planned, like when your family walks in while you're recording.
I'm just getting rid of my family. I was about to have one of those BBC News moments.
I was just going to say, that was like the BBC News.
I've just waved them away. No way.
So join us each Monday at 7 a.m. for Social Entrepreneur. Hear the stories of people just like you who are making a difference on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota.
This holiday season, shop local at Northern Sun. Since 1979, Northern Sun has been creating products for progressives so ordinary people can govern the future one shirt, one sticker, one button at a time. Redefine the art of gift giving this holiday season. Give someone what they believe in. We don't think shirts, magnets, or stickers can save the world, but we do know that wearing them can make a difference. That's Northern Sun in Minneapolis on East Lake Street or online at northernsun.com.
Hello, this is Ellen Krug with Hidden Edges Radio on Sundays from 1 to 2 p.m. Join me this Sunday for an interview with Day Pope of the Trans United Front, the behind-the-scenes organization that helped propel several transgender humans into public office early last month. It's a story about a transgender group of folks saying enough and working to control their destiny. I, for one, am darn proud of that. Hidden Edges Radio, challenging, passionate, perspective changing on AM 950.
The #1 source of the Twin Cities gay scene is all digital. Follow Twin Cities Gay Scene on Facebook and Twitter. Sign up for the Scene Shot email blast for weekly updates and chances to win great prizes. No app is needed to view the bi-weekly web editions of Scene. It's GLBTQ media for the mobile generation. Find it all at TwinCitiesGayScene.com. That's TwinCitiesGayScene.com.
Welcome back to the Wall of Power Radio Hour, everybody. I'm your host, Paul Metza, back with Andrea Swenson talking about her experience with Prince Rogers Nelson. There's no way we could end this interview without talking about your love of Prince and the wonderful time you got to spend with him in your combat boots out at Paisley Park. Right?
Yes.
Tell us about, first of all, when you started to really dig Prince, and then what an immense pleasure. Not only the book was, because really you're kind of telling his backstory.
Yeah.
It's never been told like this before.
Right.
You know, John Bream has his book. There's other people that have their books. I think Alan Light has a book. This is a really different take on the Prince life story.
Yeah, I wanted to bring out the humanity of it, you know. I really don't like, and I say this in the opening pages of the book, I really don't like the way a lot of people tend to talk about Prince like he's like an alien.
Right.
Or, you know, some otherworldly creature that just got beamed down to join us here. He is a man who grew up in North Minneapolis in the 1970s, and I think really continuing to center that part of his life is really important. That you know, he was a human, and he had faults, and he had strengths, and he was...
And he was, you know, everybody talks about the Midwest work ethic. There's nobody that had it more than Prince Rogers Nelson.
Right. So, I mean, for me, my personal relationship with his music was, as a kid growing up in the 80s, it was just part of the air that you breathe. But then when I really started turning my focus towards Minnesota music, the last 15 years of my life has really been all about documenting Minnesota music. I had to really become a Prince expert because he's one of our most famous figureheads. So I just started studying him like a class in college or something. And then it was just in the last few years that I started interacting with him directly, first through, you know, just invitations to concerts, kind of getting the sense that he was reading what I was writing, which is a really interesting revelation. And
I know he pays attention because there's that great story when John Bream dissed him in a review, and then Prince went on, I think, burnt the review
on Arsenio
Hall, and then shot Bream with a large water gun at some point.
Yes.
So he pays attention.
He definitely does. Yeah, that was just, I really don't have any words to describe that, how that relationship evolved, and then getting to meet him
well, tell us the story, though, about how you got the phone call from Bobby Z.
Yeah. It was the 30th anniversary of Purple Rain, which I know that you celebrated on this show, too. And I had interviewed Bobby. And the day that the interview went up, I got an email from him, and it just said, P wants me to see if you can come to Paisley Park tonight.
Right.
And I thought maybe this is like a party or a show or something, but when I pulled into the parking lot, Bobby Z was the only car there, and he was standing outside waiting for me, and I was like, are we in trouble? What is this? So we went inside, and we were absolutely entertained by Prince. He had a house band playing kind of beautiful jazz music while we hung out. He took us into the studio and played us a bunch of the new music that he was working on. You know, he had a real thing about not wanting to look back into the past, and especially not wanting to celebrate anniversaries. So he was giving us a little bit of a hard time about that.
So let me ask you really quickly. So you go in. He's kind of casual, but he's still being Prince, you know. So what was he wearing?
He was wearing all black, this kind of slinky, you know, in the last few years he was wearing, they look like very like upscale pajamas.
Right.
So just very, you know, comfortable but very classy black clothes. And he had a beautiful giant necklace on, I remember looking at. And I also remember that when we shook hands, we stood perfectly eye to eye because he was wearing maybe like 2 or 3 inch platforms, and I'm about 5'6", so we were just right Right there. Yeah, he was, again, bringing back to, his humanity. He was so kind and warm and open and funny. And I'd heard all these stories about journalists having just bizarre experiences trying to interact with him, and I just found him to be completely normal. The situation was a little surreal because he created his own world basically out at Paisley Park.
Xanadu.
You're sitting in a big purple plush overstuffed chair, and this house band is playing like a Bonnie Raitt song while you're talking to Prince, and my mind is kind of trying to just piece it all together. But for the most part,
little girl from Moose Lake, right?
How did this happen?
Right.
But for the most part, he was just so warm, is how I would describe it. And he was giving me kind of a hard time, just needling me a little bit. And
the give and take, the cat and mouse in the book is great.
Yeah. And I'm just really glad that I could share all of that because, as we kept talking, I realized this was maybe my only chance to ask him some of these things I'd been wondering about. So we did talk a little bit about his upbringing and what radio stations he listened to when he was a kid and what instruments he was playing when he was just starting out, and
Did you tape
years.
the interview?
No.
He wouldn't let you do that?
No, and I knew that going in, so I didn't even try.
Right.
I did have a notebook. I only pulled it out when we were in the studio together, but the other times I just talked to him conversationally.
Right.
There was one point where he stepped away for a second and I ran into the bathroom and scribbled a bunch of stuff into my notebook while it was still fresh. Right. And then at the end of the night, I sat down and wrote probably 6,000 words of just, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then...
What a phenomenal experience.
Yeah.
When you were talking about Prince just being really, at the end of the day, kind of another ordinary Minnesotan.
Yeah.
And I say ordinary in terms of... he was extraordinary. We all know that. Everybody over the world knows that. But really, just a human being like the rest of us. I remember when he passed, Paul Westerberg from The Replacements, they asked him about any interactions with Prince because The Replacements did some recording at Paisley Park. And he said, we'd be recording and Prince would show up in his pajamas and go put some popcorn in the microwave.
I love that.
I just love that. See, you get The Replacements and you get Prince's pajamas with microwave popcorn. I go, that's Minnesota to me.
Michael Bland told me a story about that too. Being, he was in the NPG in the 90s, and he really wanted to meet Paul Westerberg, and he went into the studio uninvited, wearing what he described as like a super futuristic samurai outfit because they were shooting some kind of crazy music video. And he basically snuck into the studio while Paul's producer, whoever, had stepped out, and he was like, "Hey man, I really wanted to meet you." And Paul's like, "Do you want to play on my record?" And he ended up drumming on 2 of the tracks.
Wow, and now he's playing with Soul Asylum.
Yeah.
That's the other interesting thing about about Minneapolis. So you've got Michael Bland with Westerberg. I've been honored to be playing with Willie Walker for 7 years. But there's just this really wonderful community of human beings. And I think one of the things I loved about how the book was ending up, about how Prince's version, when he really came on the scene in the early 80s, it was about all colors, all types of sexuality, all different kinds of people, and how he had a pretty utopian vision of how the world should work.
Black, white, Puerto Rican, everybody a freaking.
That's right, exactly. Thanks for listening to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. This show was produced by Paul Metza, engineered by Paul Sowie. We'd like to thank our guest, Andrea Swenson. Get her book, Got to Be Something, here at finer bookstores everywhere. You can also see Wall of Power TV every Saturday night at 8 p.m., replayed at 11:30 on mcn6.org if you got Comcast on Channel 6. Hope you're enjoying the holidays, and like my dad used to tell me, remember to be kind and make someone happy.